Wow. Whoa.
Big thanks to Napoleon Grills for sponsoring this episode.
I'm gonna show you the best 3 ways of making brisket at home. This is the 4-2-10 brisket. It is the easiest stress-free way of making brisket. And here I have the #1 brisket in the world, the Texas Monthly awarded brisket. And finally, the foil boat brisket, the best way to cook brisket on your kettle grill. Let's start with the 4-2-10 brisket. I'm gonna take off a little bit of that fat that sits on top of the brisket and then trim off all the fat that sits underneath. And to make that perfect brisket, I'm removing the big chunks of fat that will not render down during the cook. I'm gonna put some salt on, and you wanna use plenty of salt because this is a big chunk of meat. Then I follow it up with ground black pepper, and I like a thick peppery crust. Once the brisket is completely seasoned up, it's time to fire up our Napoleon Apollo smoker. I'm gonna remove the upper stacks and I'm gonna put charcoal briquettes in my charcoal basket. Then with the fire starter, I'm lighting up only the center briquettes. This is called the minion method. Once they are ignited, I'm adding a chunk of smoke wood, one directly to the fire and the second one a little bit further away so it will ignite in a few hours. Now I'm gonna put the stacks back on and place the brisket on the top level grate. The lid goes on and I'm gonna adjust the bottom vents to almost all the way closed, leaving the top vent completely open. This way I'm gonna have the cleanest smoke possible at a temperature of 120 degrees Celsius. After 4 hours, it's time to raise the temperature, so I'm gonna throw in a couple more briquettes, open up the bottom vents a little bit so it slowly comes up to 140 degrees Celsius, where I'm gonna let it sit for 2 hours. Now it's time to place that brisket in some butcher's paper and add a little bit of beef tallow that I rendered down from the trimmings of this brisket. Put it in an oven tray, add a little bit of water to create a moist environment, seal it off with some aluminum foil and set it in my oven at 65 degrees Celsius for 10 hours. And here we have the end result. Look at this beautiful brisket. I got a nice thick bark with dark black pepper. Then I have a beautiful smoke ring sitting all throughout the outside of the brisket. It is nice and juicy, and what may be even more important is that the fat rendered out properly. You can see that the intermuscular fat in between the meat completely disappeared and became juice. And what I especially like about this method is that it's stress-free. I can make this brisket without having to think about temperature and difficult things. It is just something I can do, you can do, too easy. And now it's time for the #1 brisket in the world, Goldees Barbecue Restaurant brisket. And again, I'm gonna remove all the big chunks because they won't render down. Now it's time for some flavor, so I'm gonna mix some water with some Worcestershire sauce and spray it on the brisket. That's gonna help the seasoning stick. And I tried to recreate Goldees rub as best I could. And just like at Goldees, I'm gonna finish my seasoning with a little sprinkle of black pepper. Then I'm gonna set it in my barbecue and let it smoke at a temperature of 120 degrees Celsius until I reach a core temperature of 92 degrees Celsius. And no fiddling in between, no wrapping, no spraying, no tricks. Then it's time to wrap up with a good scoop of beef tallow that I created off the trimmings of this brisket. And in the oven it goes at a temperature of 65 degrees Celsius for 10 hours. And that's how you make world's #1 brisket. Goldees brisket, definitely golden in color. We got that beautiful thick bark on the outside, we got the smoke ring, we got juicy meat, and all of that intermuscular fat that sits in the meat completely dissolved and made that brisket tender. Let's get a slice out of this. Almost fall apart tender. Look at that. Boom. And that's how you make the #1 brisket in the world, voted by Texas Monthly. Absolutely fantastic. This might be the biggest game changer if you're a kettle grill cooker. The foil boat brisket. Again, you're gonna trim up your brisket just like the other ones. Then you're gonna apply your favorite seasoning. And now it's time to set up your kettle grill. Place in a big log of firewood, and behind that log you're going to put your briquettes. Light them up with your Napoleon fire starters and dial in your Napoleon Kettle Pro so it smokes at a temperature of 120 degrees Celsius. Check it every hour to see if the color is starting to look good, and once you get a nice smoky brown color on your brisket, roll out 2 sheets of aluminum foil, place your brisket on, wrinkle up the sides, and there you have your foil boat. Set it back on your kettle grill over indirect heat and let it continue to cook until your brisket reaches a core temperature of 92 degrees Celsius. Now it's time to place that brisket in some butcher's paper and then drizzle on a little bit of that fat from the foil boat and wrap it up. Place it in your oven at a temperature of 65 degrees Celsius for 10 hours and it's done. And now you know how you can make the perfect brisket at home. Nice thick black bark, beautiful smoke ring, fat rendered out perfectly, juicy brisket. And one of the amazing things about this is that the crust on the bottom didn't dry out even though you had a lot of radiation heat. The bark became exceptionally good because the top was left open. And in my personal opinion, if you're making brisket at home on your kettle grill, this is the way to do it. And there you have it, the best 3 briskets you can cook at home. No matter if you're cooking on the Napoleon Apollo smoker or your Napoleon kettle grill, it's all good. It's gonna be freaking amazing. So don't be afraid, go out there, buy your brisket and make sure it has a little bit of intramuscular fat, and then go ahead. Test one of these methods and I'm sure you're gonna like it.